What is up, guys? Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the Bearded Talk. What an exciting past few weeks. This has been incredible. In case you missed it, we launched our customizable wedding guide. You guys are loving that. Some of you have even finished customizing your own, and it's really cool to see, what you do with the cover, what you're doing with the content, how you're implementing some of your own content, your own ideas, your personality in there. It is just so cool to see you guys level up your business. I feel like this is the time of year where you can kind of start prepping. You have a little bit, hopefully you're having a little bit less work where you can be like, okay, I'm going to start preparing. I'm going to start pushing. I want 2021 to be better. I'm going to step ahead of the fear that the pandemic put on me, or maybe you're just like, hey, the pandemic doesn't exist. You're one of those people, which is, complicated, but one of those people who wants to make their life better and their business better and serve their clients well. One of my things I love and my dream was to get to in business was I want all my clients to be ideal clients, and the wedding guide for me helped me get there. And I know for a lot of other wedding photographers, it helps them get there. So it's really, really cool. Helps your couples, helps them gain trust in you. And I hear nothing but good things when couples have that. So if you guys want to get in on that, if you haven't yet, mpweddingguide.com. That is MP as in Mason Photography, weddingguide.com. Take you right to the checkout page. Read all about it if you want. See some photos. If you're in our Facebook community, togfb.com. You can also see, behind the scenes what people are working on. Incredible resource for you guys. Do not miss that. Today's guest is a really, really fun lady. I love her, Kelly Lemon. She is based in Seattle, and somebody told me about her, and I can't remember who. And this person told me that she basically shot weddings with one arm, and at sometimes for some shoots for a very small portion of time that we'll get into in the episode, shot a wedding with no arms, literally no hands. So we'll get into kind of that story and how that works and how she does it. But I loved her inspirational story, not just for pushing through, but for prepping her clients and really going above and beyond to communicate effectively, both with her couples and the photographers that help, execute her vision, which I think was incredible. So just really, really fun episode. Kelly is awesome. She's just got a lot to share, and I would encourage you guys to dive deep into this one. So without any further ado, here's Kelly Lemon. Kelly, it is so incredible to have you on. I'm a big Seattle fan. So, we've had different people like Benj Haishon and Jordan Voth, lots of Seattle people. I am a Patriots fan, though, so I am anti-Seahawks. But yeah, super great to have you on. I'm excited to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be really cool. So some of the background I learned about you was literally, and we'll get into the details of all this, but somebody said, hey, you need to talk to Kelly Lemon. And I was like, okay. And, people recommend me all the time, recommend guests to me all the time. And I will search it out. I will go take a look and see, is there something interesting in their actual work? Is it something in their brand and like how they communicate? Are they just an interesting person with a cool story? And for you, I feel like it was all three. Like, okay, yeah, she has good work, lives in Seattle, has a cool, mission-based brand based on, what you want for photographers and your clients. And then, for lack of better terminology, which we can totally get into, you have photographed weddings and photograph weddings now with, we'll just say less than two arms.
You can say only the use of one arm. That's fine.
With only the use of one arm. Yeah. So just for people who are curious about that. So I saw all of that and I was like, this is incredible because I love talking to people about their stories and, the setbacks before the comebacks, and those kinds of things. And then also too, the how does that affect your businesses and kind of all the feelings that you have when things like that happen, depending on what that looks like. So before we get into all that, give us a little background on the Kelly Lemon story, the lemonade issue, I guess, if you will. Tell us everything about you.
Well, thank you for that awesome intro. So I would say I am a Pacific Northwest based wedding and elopement photographer, and my husband and I have been fortunate to live kind of around the world over a course of our marriage, and that really shapes our worldview. And our approach to just to how we serve people and wanting to serve people with different backgrounds and really kind of create community in every opportunity that we can. And that really kind of is the foundation of my business, is community and serving others and putting others first. We recently welcomed my daughter named Juliana into our lives, which has been amazing journey. That in and of itself is a whole nother podcast story, but we got to welcome her through surrogacy. I wasn't able to carry her, and my cousin actually came to me and volunteered to help us grow our family. And so now Juliana's here, and she just turned 9 months. And so that was just an amazing thing that our community has been like rallying and following our journey for almost 4 years now. And so to have her here is such a blessing. But so that's just a big about me. I love wine. I love having really good, like hosting parties. I really miss that. I used to host this like epic Friendsgiving party every year. And so that's one thing I'll miss this year, but I just love bringing people together. And I think that would probably sum me up.
That's awesome. I'm on the same way. I feel like, when you can have different people, I'm that guy that in high school, I was curious why everybody couldn't sit at the same table, which is kind of altruistic, right? And but I'm like, listen, I believe we could just figure this out. And there's probably a kind of privileged position, but I think part of me was like, no, like we can, this can happen. So that's really, really, really cool. Also fascinating about surrogacy. That's a whole other episode, but I would love to, this is not the podcast for that, but I'm like, I want to know, because I just have this curiosity. Mm-hmm. How long, give me some kind of basic rundown. How long have you been a wedding photographer? What's your kind of normal workload in a non-COVID year? How many weddings or so? Mm-hmm. And are you alone? Do you work alone or do you work on a team?
Yeah. So I have been doing photography, learning photography for 14 years. But this is my 10th year in business and my 7th year full time. And I started limiting the number of weddings just for like life balance. So normally around 20-25 weddings a year is kind of my normal routine, but all over the world, kind of not just in Seattle or Colorado, but kind of we've done weddings in Ecuador and Hawaii, Mexico, and so that's just something I feel very fortunate to be able to see other parts of the world through that. But yeah, so I've been in the business for a while. So cool. It's just me right now. I don't have a team, but it's running solo and going well.
That is so cool. I love that. Tell me, so part of our story, we talked about this a little bit, was, this story of having, one working arm or something like that. Give me the rundown on, was that something you always lived with, or is that something that happened suddenly, or kind of walk me through that whole situation? And were you a wedding photographer when you kind of lost the use of, one or both arms? Like, what was that? What was the timeline for that? Yeah.
So there's kind of two different parts of the story, and we'll get into the second part, I think, a little later. But just to kind of clarify for everybody, I was in a car accident when I was 12. And so it was a near fatal car accident with my family. We're on a road trip. It was July 2000, so exactly 20 years this past summer.
Wow.
And my brother fell asleep at the wheel on a road trip, and I had just taken my seatbelt off to kind of readjust. And so my head went out the side window, and the frame, and then my body went out the window, hit the guardrail, and the car rolled over me. And so it was just one of those extreme situations where it paralyzed a fourth of my body instantly. Broke a lot of bones, punctured a lot of organs, and it was they called a Flight for Life helicopter and told my mom that I wasn't going to make it, and so they kind of had to have some really hard conversations over those few days, and thankfully I pulled through, and 17 surgeries later, I'm still alive and well, and but it was definitely a journey because I was right-handed at the time and definitely not ambidextrous. And so learning to do life with my left hand, going into 7th grade was a challenge at the time. And also just for your own view of your body image, so much of my face was I had so many broken bones in my face, and it really kind of impacted, how I viewed my body at the time. But so that was kind of the journey. And then I started looking into photography in high school. And what part of my story is just this idea of overcoming. And that kind of stems from this, this teacher who couldn't quite see bigger than her own fears and bigger than her own limitations. And so when I asked about the photography class, she kind of shut me down and just said, "Hey, I'm really sorry, but photography is actually a two-armed art and you're not going to be able to do it. So I just think you should get into something else. Just kind of let it go." And I kind of took that as a challenge to be like, I don't believe that to be true. And so at the time it was a film photography darkroom class. And so I learned to roll film with my feet. So it's a little bit
so
wild,
crazy.
but yeah, so less circus tricks now that I shoot mostly digital, but yeah, so that kind of just was this incredible process for me of learning I can do this, and I love it. And so then, later on, my passion then turned into my profession, but that's kind of how everything started. Was the car accident was 20 years ago, and that's what paralyzed my right arm. And there's been journeys throughout the last 20 years of I've had other issues with my left arm as well. And that's been a struggle. That was a struggle for me in 2009, sorry. They did a surgery for my right arm to reduce nerve pain, and it went south, and they didn't reconstruct my neck correctly. So the disc slid out and started severing nerves on the left side as a result of the surgery. So I lost the use of my left arm for about a year. And that was my last year in college. And so that was a real incredible journey doing my senior show. I was studying photography, and I couldn't hit the trigger. I couldn't use my finger. I couldn't hit the trigger. And so then, but I had a lot of treatment, and I would have 24 hours I could use my arm. And then they would adjust the disc, and they'd say, okay, you have 18 to 24 hours. And then the disc would slide out, and I would never know when I would lose it. And then I would lose 90% of my function. So I was really scared to drive. I was really scared to there were times where I'd be walking through college cafeteria holding a tray, and then all of a sudden I would lose my ability to hold it, and everything would go crashing down, and it would be so confusing for other people because they're like, she was just holding the tray of food before, and now she can't even pick it up. And it was just this kind of that was a rough year. That was a tough journey. But there was so much passion that went into my senior show, because my senior show that year was a documentary on the accident. And I went back and photographed the accident site, and I photographed my scars as they were healing, and did this whole black and white documentary show on the process of healing. And for all those that were in the studio with me, it was such a journey for them, because they were seeing my health kind of deteriorate that year with my left arm not working. And that was something that had never happened before. And so it was a new issue that I had never dealt with. So eventually my left arm came back after lots and lots and lots of treatment. And I was really thankful to gain my left arm again. And then for many years, my left arm worked normally. So, but that was a tough year, and it definitely added a lot of passion to how much I love photography, because I was willing to kind of push through, because I knew there was something deeper there.
Yeah, no, what an insane story. I knew kind of the bits and pieces, but that is crazy. Give me, for folks listening, a little bit of background, pre-accident, I don't even know the technical term, so forgive me, but fully able-bodied, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pre-accident?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then post-accident, other than you said some broken bones in your face and issues with the arms, were there any other injuries? Or I imagine it was a smorgasbord of
I broken my collarbone I basically shattered my right shoulder pretty bad, so they had to reconstruct my shoulder with metal plates and screws, because there just wasn't enough bone left to put it back together. So they kind of put my back, so it's a little bionic. They've taken the plates out now, but became a bionic woman for a little while. But other than that, the only thing long-term right now is the paralysis. And then I also do, unfortunately, suffer from chronic nerve pain that comes with paralysis. And that's actually more, I would say, limiting. That's the thing that limits me more than the paralysis itself, because I've adapted to life with one arm. I basically can do pretty much everything I want to do. And I've just learned to do it with one arm. But I think the pain management is the thing that I think a lot of people don't always talk about, or and that's the thing that we're really actively wanting to change. And but we found a way to continue to live on and pursue a positive life of thinking about others. And I think when you think of others, it allows you to have more strength to get through your own trial.
Wow, that is insane. Okay, so accident happens later on, or kind of defeatist mindset of an art teacher, like it's the two-handed art form, which if I was the art teacher too, I would feel like, listen, like you've watched movies where somebody told Michael Jordan, hey, you're not good enough to play the high school basketball team. He was cut, and like if you just say this girl is going to become a professional photographer. Like you just know, like, what are you doing? Like, why would you do that? But I think like, even at that level, right? 7th grade of like this, chip on your shoulder, perhaps, that kind of like mental toughness to be like, nope, this is what I'm passionate about. Or even if you went into some other field and you're like, no, well, at least I'm going to be able to do photography, just to say like, F you to this art teacher, I think is pretty enjoyable. But so you eventually become a professional photographer. You learn to live with, the one arm vibe. But during the time that you've been a professional, you also, I think you mentioned this earlier, you lost some other feeling in your other arm, and you were working. Mm-hmm. You were actively working, right?
Yeah.
And so you're already probably, a little bit. I don't know if you get this, but I'm sure there's a curiosity of like, what do clients think when they hear that I'm, the one-armed lemon, kind of, mm-hmm. One-armed Kelly, and what does that look like? And then now, okay, I have the situation and it's affecting my work and I have a wedding, in 2 weeks or whatever. How did that work? How did you recover from that business-wise? What fears did you have? The only example I have is I missed my first wedding last year, mm-hmm. and it was because of an injury. And I was terrified. I was like, oh my gosh, like, okay, like what happens now? What's the process here? Do I hire photographers to cover for me? Do I refund the couples and like go broke? Like, what's the process there? I was just so nervous, because this is our livelihood, and I don't know about you, but I do not have enough for retirement yet. Still working on that. Mm. And so, what were some of your feelings at that time? Like, what happened? And start me there before you tell me like how you recovered from that part.
Yeah. So, kind of chapter 2 of this story is, like I said, I lost the use of my left arm in 2009, and that was a huge ordeal. And then, almost 10 years go by, and in 2018, so just about 2 years, about 2 years ago.
Yeah, recent.
I had just finished shooting like 10 sessions in a day, a really packed day. And then like that night, I remember like it was March 25th, 2018. And I started having pretty extreme neck pain. And I have, some problems in my neck from all the surgeries and things like that. But it was much sharper and more intense. And so I went to my chiropractor, and he was like, wow, things are really inflamed. This is kind of weird. And within 3 days, I couldn't lift a 3-pound weight with my left arm. So I was drastically losing mobility and feeling in my left arm round 2. And by Friday, I remember I was driving home and my arm fell off the wheel while I was driving. And thankfully, I was able to use my legs to like get off the road. But that was when I was like, oh, crap, like this is happening again. And like, what am I going to do? And then it kind of went into like the next couple of weeks of like, what is going on? Finally went to the ER. I feel like I have kind of a delayed reaction. I feel like most people go to the ER like immediately if their arm just stopped working. But I was like, well, this has happened before. Like maybe it'll come back, and I just was like, went like 10 days later, and like couldn't get dressed, couldn't feed. My husband had to like set up cups with like little straws so I could like have water, because I lost both. I had no upper extremity, and it was just so intense. And then we found out that it was completely unrelated to all my other medical issues. And that was when things really kind of like was like, wait, what? And they said nothing was going on with my neck. It was nothing to do with like, so I went through, CAT scans, MRIs, went to like all the neurologists, and they just couldn't figure it out. And they finally were like, okay, I don't want to tell you this. Like this one top neurologist was like, I don't want to tell you this in case I'm like, I don't want to scare you in case I'm wrong. But I think it's this very rare disease syndrome that attacks nerves, and it causes inflammation, and it suffocates nerves from the brain, and suffocates nerves and cut off circulation to the brain. But it's really rare, and it usually happens with people who don't use their limbs, and you use your left arm more than anyone. So we actually don't know why this happened to you. They were just like, we're really confused by what happened. So I finally got to a neurologist who'd actually seen this syndrome. It's called Parsonage-Turner syndrome. And I think what was so wild was that it literally has nothing to do with any other medical issue. And it could have happened to you and it could have happened to someone else. And it normally
Yeah.
takes an upper extremity. And then it just happened to take the one that worked instead of the one that didn't work, which was really unfortunate.
Wow.
And so that was just a wild thing. So then I sat down with the neurologist and he was like, okay, I'm just going to shoot it to you straight. I've only seen 10 cases in my entire life and I'm 75. So there's not a lot to go off of.
Yeah.
But every single one of those cases, it took at least like a year to 2 years to come back. So this is going to be like a long haul for you. And so I just want to prepare you that like you shouldn't be expecting to get motor or feeling back anytime soon. Cause I was like, I'm like a couple weeks away from like my full weddings. This is like April. So I was
March, April. Yeah.
I was like, so my wedding season starts really soon and I'm going to need this arm. So that's not going to work in my schedule. and, and I was like, and I've always been part of my journey, I think has been like with every surgery, if it's like 95% success rate, unfortunately, I've always been in the 5%. So things just haven't worked for me medically. And so
yeah,
I'm used to that. So like, so when someone says like, this is going to work for you. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm normally in the 2% that it doesn't, but trying to be hopeful. So, so it was really kind of a challenge to kind of have hope and push past fear that my story could be different. But I just had this peace and this confidence that I was going to recover quicker. And I was like, I'm not going to let this defeat me. I'm going to recover, do everything I can. It's kind of a waiting game anyway. The inflammation just has to kind of dissipate. But I just had this like hope that like, no, this is going to be different. So I told him, I'm going to be your first 2-monther. And he was just like, okay, well, positivity's good. He was like, I've never seen it before, but good for you. And I just had this peace. I was like, no, I'm just not going to accept this. Like, I'm going to push through. And what was amazing was, March 25th is when it happened. May 25th, I had a follow-up appointment and I walked in, gave him a high five and was like, I'm your first 2-monther.
Oh my
Mic
gosh.
drop. And it was just basically a complete miracle. And I had I'm a person of faith and I had a 6-week gap in May and June where no one booked weddings for a long I had one wedding at the beginning of May and that's what I want to talk to you guys about. But after that was May through June, no one booked. And I was like, I don't know what's going on in May and June. When earlier in the year, I'm like, but something's going on because every single thing is just not working out. And the rest of my season is packed. So I'm like, I don't know what's going on in those 6 weeks. But after I had my wedding at the beginning of May, I had one at the end of June and I had this goal. I'm going to shoot the wedding end of June. Cause after that was every weekend. And I was like, and I had this determination and by God's grace and a complete miracle, my left arm was functioning and strong enough that by June, I got to shoot that wedding on my own and did the rest of my season. But the thing is when we were in this season of it in April, where we're going to specialists, we have no idea what's going on. At one point, they thought I was a brain tumor. It was a lot of scary conversations, and my left arm's not working. So practically, I can't get dressed. I can't take my dog out. I can't put a jacket on. I can't. So my community really rallied and supported us. And in that crazy, I couldn't cook. I couldn't feel. It just was one of those things where it was just such a big life experience. And I think just going through that, I just had to really cling on to hope and be how am I going to talk to my clients about this? I'm I have 25 couples that I need to tell that, hey, I know you guys have always supported me and I love the enthusiasm and their commitment to our community. But I only have one arm and that one arm is not working. So how am I going to communicate this? And I think the thing that I've been really passionate about was encouraging and helping photographers navigate this. And this is such a good example of how do you navigate this conversation? How do you navigate talking to your clients when crap hits the fan? Right.
Yeah.
So
that's tough.
So basically what happened was, I reached out to my couple who their wedding was less than 3 weeks away. And my arm was definitely not working. And so I wrote them an email, and I really think it's important that I really wanted to dig through just a couple points in some tips for photographers in this email. So the first thing I did was, what's my solution? My solution was I was going to have my second shooter be my arms for the day. So that means that she was going to carry the weight of my camera. I was going to verbally tell her all of my settings, and I would direct the couple. I would be there with them emotionally to support them. The voice that they would be hearing through the whole day would be mine. And then, and then it'd be my editing style, my preset, everything like that. And so I was like, that's a good solution. So I'm like, but we need to test it out, because I can't just tell a bride like, hey, I've never tried it, and your wedding is the guinea pig, So
right, exactly.
So we did a couple shoots with past couples, because I wanted to be able to get their feedback of like, okay, you've shot with me before. How did this feel different? So we did 2 shoots, and they went really well. And then, so what I did was then I asked my bride, will you write a review about this experience? And she was able to say, it felt just like Kelly and having a second shooter, because my voice was Kelly's, she was directing us, and the images look like exactly like her work. I chose a photographer that's an amazing photographer. She's worked with me for 3 years. She knows my style, and I was controlling all the settings. So it really was a good solution. But in this email, I first said, hey, I just want to let you know, it's really exciting. You're going to have 3 full-time wedding photographers at your wedding. And I was like, that's awesome. That's how I introed it. I was like, I'm really excited that you're going to have 3 full-time wedding photographers. And then I said, I'm having a little bit of weakness in my arm. So one of the photographers is going to help me carry the weight of my equipment. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys the heads up. All expenses are on me, like no additional expenses. But just to put your mind at ease, here are some test shoots that I did with this method. And so then I had a link to galleries right there at the top, like, so they could look at the galleries and see like, oh, that looks like just like her work, And then the next section was the review. So I'm like, and I asked my bride, I did her wedding, and I asked her for a really raw, honest review of what it was like to have an additional person helping me carry some weight of the equipment. And then they had all the assurance of all of the fears. Like, right, you just have to go through, like, what are they thinking? What are their questions? And how can I answer that before I tell them that my left arm is paralyzed? So I structured the email in that way, where it was like solution, and then like examples, like actual proof of like, this is going to work and it's a good solution. Yeah. And I'm going to take care of you. And then a personal review from another bride. So another bride can like speak, honestly.
Right. social proof.
Yep. Social proof. And then at the end said, if you'd like to know more on what's going on, I've been finding, I have some weakness in my left arm. They think it's a syndrome. We're not exactly sure what's going on, but I'm 110% that the solution is going to be amazing. I'm there for you. Like, and it was just one of those things where we did the wedding. It was mentally exhausting because I was like, oh my gosh, I had to verbally say all my setting, but it definitely showed that I knew my stuff, because I was like, okay, f-stop 2.8 or f-stop, whatever, shutter speed. Oh my gosh. And then at the end of the day, the thing that like meant the most to me was my bride came over to me and was like, hey, I just want to let you know, I am so sorry that you're going through this, but I really wanted to tell you that when I got your email, I was heartbroken that this is happening, but I didn't feel any stress. She was like, I just knew that if it was good enough for you, it was good enough for me, and that you were going to take care of me. And I just knew whatever solution you had would be more than enough. And this whole day I felt taken care of.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, I got a 5-star review from a couple, and their wedding was 2 weeks after I lost a limb, like I lost the use of a limb. So I just think that it was one of those things where I was like, wow, like we need to talk to photographers about how to talk with their clients when life happens. You can still give an incredible client experience, while also dealing with your own life stuff.
Yeah. What do you think, in order to make that decision, right, and say, you know what, I can't shoot, but your choice was to still try and save the wedding, to still try and make it happen. did there have to be some humility in there to be like, oh, I'm going to let another photographer shoot under my name, right? When you're not necessarily prepared for that, or you're not necessarily interested in that at the moment, right? You're like, oh, I have a second photographer who's pretty consistent with me. Like, what was that decision-making process like to where you're like, okay, nope, we're going to save it, and hopefully it feels, and hopefully you like the work, right? Because it's like you're not hands-on per se, pun intended.
Yeah, I think it was really the perfect situation in that, like, I knew I had the right person. It was definitely like someone that's worked with me. Our styles are very similar, and we shot mostly live view. So I would see the back of the camera, and I would tell her, okay, for the next few shots, I want a couple of vertical. I would then we're going to zoom in, and we're going to move closer, and we're going to crop right below the nose, and we're going to get a detail shot of. So I literally was directing kind of everything, like a lot style wise. Like I was telling her, so she was mostly just clicking the shutter, which was important as a professional photographer. She knew when to click the shutter.
Sure.
But yeah, it was definitely, I think the work was definitely definitely a blend, right, of our artistic style, but it was it was a gallery that I was 100% like, this is up to Kelly Lemon photography standards. Cool. And I would never have had an assistant that wasn't a full-time photographer. Like I wouldn't, if someone to carry my equipment and be my eyes and hands, it had to be someone that was a photographer, and ideally someone that knew me and my work and my style.
Yeah.
And I mean, she'd worked with me so much that our styles were really blended. So it was just really a dream that I could have her as my assistant that day. And I think it would have been really challenging if it was not someone that knew me that well.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, I think a lot of photographers, we're very independent, and we're very like, oh yeah, I for better or for worse, we're alone in this, right? So some days you have those really like lonely, exhausting days, and you're like, oh, I wish I was back at the office. But this is one of those times where I think just that takeaway is like, hey, photographers, you need to have some people. You need to have your people that like you can hopefully rely on or reach out to or whatever. And I think it's deeper. It's a deeper request than like just a Facebook call out. Like, hey, I don't have any arms this week. Can anybody cover for me? It's a lot. It's a lot more strict than that. And I think too, like there's stress. Let's say that's like a big wedding for you, right? Or it's a high value dollar. And obviously you want to treat every couple great. But what if it was
we had to fly down to Carmel Valley, and it was at this like wow. So like that was nothing. I had to pay for my second shooter to fly down because I was hiring a local second shooter originally. Who I still had to hire because she had to be the second shooter. So I had to fly my second shooter down with me from Seattle, fly my husband with me because I couldn't put a seatbelt on the airplane. Like I couldn't do anything or carry my bags. Yeah. So I am paying for my husband to fly down, paying for my second shooter to fly down to be my arms. And then, obviously a local second shooter to actually be the second shooter. So it was a wedding, that had a lot of anticipation, and we give everything to each wedding. But I actually also noticed it was interesting that it took humility on my second shooter, Megan's part too, right? Because I asked a couple of photographers that were locally in California as backups, and some people were really resistant to, I think, like that. Yeah, which was interesting. They were like resistant to be like, well, then I'm not going to be able to like take credit for that. Like I'm going to shoot, and I was like, well, you're right. You're going to work under my business, so it was interesting that it only happened to a couple people. And I knew that Megan was going to be the perfect fit for me, but it was an interesting reaction where I was like, oh, that's interesting. Just interesting response. Most of the time in our photography community, I really feel like it's, there's a lot of camaraderie and we like support each other. And that's what I have experienced most of the time. But there were a couple people who I felt didn't say it, but definitely had some resistance of like, oh, well, I'm just going to be your hands. Like, I'm not going to be able to like do my own like spin on it. And I'm like, well, that's not the kind of the point. It's like, you're right. The kind of the point.
We need zero spin right now.
Yeah. So that was an interesting conversation, but yeah, it was just an incredible experience. And also having to communicate that with the rest of my couples. Like I had to write that email and then share that with all because the thing is that people were starting to like post on my Facebook, like, hey, I'm so sorry about what's going on. And a lot of my clients are my Facebook friends. And so then I was like, I had to tell like anyone that was like in my small group or knew me personally, I was like, hey, I am like trying to get all these solutions out. Meanwhile, I'm like in the ER, I'm like trying to get these solutions all together so that I can send this email to my couples with all of their questions answered with like photo, proof and shoots and all this stuff. Right. So I just need like 2 weeks. Can you guys like not tell anyone, can you just like not like, I love that you're concerned and I love your prayers, but like, please don't post on my wall until I can like talk to my clients, because I just didn't want them to hear it from someone else. And that would be really alarming, if they were like, oh my gosh, my photographer lost her arm, So so that was something that I was thankful that I sent the email to all my couples, and thankfully they were all really supportive, and I didn't have anyone back out. I didn't have anyone request a refund. And I think that.
Did you give them the option? Did you say like, hey, if you're not confident in this, this is something we can do?
Yeah. I gave them the option that I said, like, if this is something that makes you nervous or brings stress, like my goal is for you to have a stress-free day. And I am 110% confident because I've already done it. Like I've done these shoots that I know I can bring the same level and craft to your day. But if you feel uncomfortable, there is no judgment. There's no hard feelings. Like I will for sure find a photographer that has a similar style. We can get you a refund and I'll take care of you. Just give them the option.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's kind of funny. Like when you show up to those emails with couples and stuff like that, like if you were so confident in your position or your take or whatever, and you truly are, you're like, yeah, I want to help you. We've set this up. Like we've set this up for success. I think when people trust you when you say, hey, I'm willing to give you a full refund if you guys want to back out. Like I'm willing to do this. They're like, that might not even have been on their brains at the initial start of the email, but by the end they might have been like, oh yeah, maybe. But the fact that you're like, hey, if this is something you want to explore, you totally can. And I think there's power in being ready for that and like being prepared to, offer that. And then I think the other cool thing is just like, there's a lot of photographers, I feel like, and I would do the same thing, where our industry like shares highlights all the time. And I mean, now this is part of your story, right? And it's like very normal to be like, okay, yeah, we're going to go see Kelly Lemon's Instagram and like, oh, this is going to be a thing, but especially after this podcast. But it's like before that happens, I think a lot of photographers are not prone to want to share this thing, right? Those fears we talked about, this scary thing of like, oh, I am less than right now, or that's how it feels, and then thus my business is less than. Do my clients now view me as this way? Like, will they view me this way? And so that's scary. It's awesome to hear that you were like, you know what, like and that's usually how it should be, as like most relationships is like, hey, get out in front of it and like say the right thing, prepare everything, like have a solution before they question the problem.
We basically use the same draft for COVID. Like basically,
right? Exactly.
We like use the same template to be like, okay, we're going to get ahead of the questions. We're going to get ahead of the conversation. We're going to do a video recording of me talking to my clients and saying like, hey, this is scary. I know it's scary, but we have solutions and we have answers. And this is what, like, I'm going to take care of you, and like getting ahead of it rather than being like so afraid to like, am I going to get the email where someone's going to cancel? And I'm thankful that I didn't have any cancellations for COVID either. And I think some of that is really being ahead of that communication, answering questions, assuring them, calming nerve before they have the chance to even come to you with it. But that fear that you mentioned is true. I mean, I went to a photography conference years ago and some of the top, like, I'm not going to name names, but some of the top photography educators told me to hide the fact that I only use one arm. And they were like, I really think you're going to scare off your clients and you're a good photographer. So why don't you just, put your work out there and then they can figure that out later after they book. And it was one of those things where they were like, I'm just think that if you, put it out there too much, you're just going to scare off a lot of your people and you're a good photographer. So you shouldn't do that. Like, and I was just kind of like, yeah, I'm not going to take that advice. Like, I just thought that I was just surprised. I was surprised by that. Just by that advice and that approach. And I think a lot of photographers probably would feel the same way. I'm like, oh, I need to hide this part of my story. And of course, like every person is different with their story. And I don't ever want to push someone else to share something that's vulnerable for them. Like if that's a
Yeah.
safer place for them to not integrate that into their business, then that's like power to you. Like this is your business. Like this is your walk. And so there's not a right way to do it. But I don't ever want people to feel like they can't, like that they can't, that
Yeah.
like to be so scared that if I share this part of me, then I'm going to lose all my clientele, or people are going to not trust me, or they're going to question if I can actually do it. I'm like, your work speaks for itself. So, if you can put your work out there and share a vulnerable part of who you are, then I almost feel like it's this deeper commitment of people being like, I want to support you. I love that you are overcoming, and I love that that's a part of your journey. And that's something I'm excited to like put my dollar behind. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. I mean, I think there's intentionality there. And I think too, whoever those educators that told you to hide it, screw those people. But, because like this is also, I think our wedding couples, it's usually their first time getting married. And there's a lot of grace in that to where they don't necessarily care how the results get, how it gets done, like, and if you're very communicative, which you are anyway, even if you had both arms, like your brand is very communicative, like they know you're going to set them up for success. Like I think couples ask me all the time, like, hey, do you bring an assistant to every shoot? And I'm like, no, I'm the opposite. Like, I'm very much like, if I could bring half of me to a shoot, I would be even happier than having the whole me there. Like I want the minimum amount of everybody there. So it's like, they don't know. And I think, and not in a mean way to take advantage of them by any means, but like, you can say, no, this is my process. This is me. This is how we do things. And like, I think there's safety in that. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's cool. Outside of the idea of, even with the brand thing, we talked about this on the phone before, of like, attracting, or like couples who are not fully able-bodied being like, oh, she gets it. I think that's the number one thing I've learned about branding the last few years is like my clients, if they see my work, when they become a client, they see the work, or they see everything, or they hear my voice on the phone. And the ultimate thing that makes them book go is he gets it. He gets us. Mm-hmm. Right. And the ones that I don't, or doesn't feel like that way, then it doesn't work out, and that's okay. And I think that is something that so many photographers need to learn is like your couples just help them get you, and be honest about it, whatever your process is. And I think like people will attach them to that. And again, if the work is good, that's the icing on the cake that gets them in the door, and then and communicate the rest of it. Like I think that's incredible. I do have one question before we talk about something else, but for having the team helping you shoot, how did you shoot the ceremony though, where it's like quiet? Like, did you whisper in their ear? Did you have a walkie-talkie and you're like, hey, this is what you need to do? Breaker, Kelly Lemon.
Yeah, we just communicated a lot before. We communicated a lot beforehand. So we communicated I basically walked through the ceremony site and said, okay, these are your settings. You're going to stay on these settings, but if you need to adjust shutter speed, because if the light changes, if the sun comes through, whatever, I trust you as a photographer.
Yeah.
But I would like to be shooting at this aperture. I would like you to start on this lens, and then you're going to switch to this lens. I will be with you, so I will have the lenses ready. Like, actually, no, I can't. No, that's not true. I couldn't hold a bag. Never mind. I was like, I will remind you of which lens, I'll be with you. I'll remind you of which lens if you have any questions. I want to get, this detail shot. And then after we shoot that and we feel like we got that, and they're starting to do like the minister is starting to do his spiel or whatever, then I want to do like I just kind of walked them through everything beforehand, and then we didn't talk. And so there was a little bit of trust there that I was like hoping that, my team would deliver, and they did a great job. And I was really happy with what they did. And there's a couple of things where I'm like, oh, I wish we would have gotten this one moment differently. But at that point, I'm like, you know what? We had 2 weeks to prepare, and they have a full gallery, and they're never going to notice.
It looks awesome.
They're never going to notice if they're not. It's just more of a picky thing. So there were like a couple months when I was looking through the gallery to see like, oh, I would have shot this tiny bit differently, or if, whatever. But overall, I was so happy with the outcome, and I know that they were too. And so I was like, okay, perfect. We didn't have a lot of time to prepare, and I know that we delivered 110%, and they, my client's happy, and that's what matters.
That's super cool. That's awesome. Was there anything throughout the process that you that you were like, oh, I do wish I would have communicated this, or that would have been nice to do this? Was there anything that you messed up on, or you felt like, okay, if I had to do this again, this is what I would do differently?
Let me think about that for a second. I think, trying, I guess following up in some ways. I think some people were, I felt like I kind of I shared the information and then,
Yeah.
and then I was kind of also living it, right? I'm still in the doctor's offices. I'm still like in CAT scans and like kind of living life. But I felt like, okay, I took care of my clients. They know. And then, once they email me back and let me know what's going on or what they want to do, or if they're happy to move forward or whatnot, then I'll take care of them. Yeah. But I think there was a little bit of a gap, because I was recovering. And so I think that I didn't realize that they became really invested, and they were like really wanting to know the updates, not just for their wedding, but just because we had developed a friendship. And I think that going back now and actually kind of what I'm living through right now, I'm doing some treatment right now, and I'm learning now round 3 what it's like to communicate consistently with my couples, and to like let them know and give them heads up, just as like hey, if you want to stay updated with what's going on, I'm going to have a blog series about this. So it's something you can opt into, but not something that I'm just going to like push on them. But if they wanted to like know more, and I think I just didn't have the capacity to do that at the time. So, but now that like, we're kind of in another season, which is kind of part 3 of my story, is the season I'm in right now. I'm learning how to communicate through that.
That's awesome. What does life look like for you right now, shooting and all that stuff, process wise? Like, do you still get nervous going into weddings? Have you had some weddings where you're like, oh, I need to call my second shooter person? What's that been like? And what's outside of COVID, what's that been like for you?
Well, this year in particular is a very unique year, obviously with COVID, but also personally, because just to kind of clarify with everybody, my left arm has been working since 2018. So I'm back to being one-handed again. And then I got to shoot the rest of that season, which was amazing. But then what's interesting is last year in 2019, I was approached by a doctor who does functional neurology. And it's basically helping your brain rewire and find new neural pathways to access muscles and nerves. And so he came to me and said, I have no idea if this will work. I don't think that anyone in functional neurology across the country has ever worked with a patient like you. But I think we might be able to regain some feeling and motor in your right arm, the one that's been paralyzed for 20 years. And I was like, okay, like I'm like thinking like this probably won't work. So he offered me a free session to try it out. And so I came to Colorado for 3 weeks, and it was 3 times a day, every day. It was pretty intense. And we saw some incredible progress. And so we were like, okay, this is interesting. So I did another intensive round and started seeing motor and started seeing feeling coming back in my paralyzed arm. And it's just this wild thing. So then when COVID hit, it's this like amazing silver lining that, we kind of were like, we were in Seattle, and this whole past year, we were like, oh man, I wish I had access to this type of treatment where I could continue to go and see where this would go. But, I have a daughter, I'm living in Seattle. I can't just fly back and forth for 3 weeks at a time. That doesn't really work for my family, as I'm like a new mom. Yeah. But then 95% of my weddings were postponed. And so I had this gap between October and May of this year. And so my husband, like, as I was driving home from an elopement, he called me and was like, crazy idea. Just going to prepare you. What if we moved to Colorado for the next 10 months and just focused on this treatment and the chance to see if you could reduce your nerve pain and get some feeling and mission, like just see what happens with this treatment. And because the main goal is that this treatment actually helps reduce nerve pain, which is like we've tried so many things for 20 years, and it's just gotten worse over the years, which is pretty rare. Usually dims. And this is the first time that we've seen progress. And so my husband was like, let's do this. Let's focus on your health. Like, he can work remote. So we did. We decided it was very, very quick. Within 6 weeks, we made the decision, put our house on the market, sold our house, and moved to Colorado. And then, I can, again, now it's this process of communicating with my couples and letting them know that like I'm flying back on my expense. Like there's no, like expense extra for them. But then it worked out perfectly because I flew back in October, did my last 2 weddings. And then, up until May, the rest of my weddings start in May. So like May through next summer.
Wow.
And so I'm currently in Vail, Colorado, doing functional neurology treatment for my right arm, and we're seeing progress, and it's kind of just a crazy miracle.
That is so cool. What a man, that's so convenient, thankfully, at some level, probably not the best thing ever, but what an option, to make it happen. And I think that'll be really cool. Anything else that you would want to tell photographers that have heard your story and are, it's not just a story of perseverance, but a story of good business savvy and communication and, setting something we say in Mace Photography is we say that our communication sets the tone with a lot of our couples. And we don't say that in a mean way, but we're usually first to email them about something that they haven't thought about or, give them guidance. We have a 100-page wedding guide book that we actually give all of our couples when they book to, help them just pros and cons of, a timeline with a first look or without a first look. And I want them to feel very informed, but from a photographer who's going to be with them the whole day. And I'm like, guys, your florist, your cake artist, your whomever, they're awesome, but they're not going to be with you the whole day. And you most likely like photography a little bit more than the average couple if you're hiring us. I want to help you have what you've seen in our work before and repeat that, so that's something I applaud in you. When I heard your story, I was like, oh yeah, she gets it. She's one of those people that's hey, you're going to get an email from me. So anything else you've learned that you want to share with photographers that they should know, about this kind of story and what they should take away?
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where we have put so much focus on finding that ideal client, right? That's a part of so many different talks. And I understand there is so much value in that, in your branding. But I think if photographers put the same amount of effort in being the ideal photographer, rather than just finding the ideal client, their business would change.
Wow.
And I think that if we really internally focus of what would I want? What kind of communication would I want when it really focus on every part of your business. How can you go above and beyond and level up in your service and your customer service and your community, everything, every part of your business? How can you level up and be the ideal scenario where, you really are taking care of them from every angle? And one thing that I love doing is I host an event every year for my couples. And a lot of people sometimes will reach out and be like, how did you do that? That seems like it'd be really expensive or whatever. And I was like, guys, it costs $1,500 to take my couples out on a private sailboat. And if they got married, it doesn't matter when they got married, they're always invited. So we have this community that comes back every year, and I treat them to a really amazing experience that they're going to want to tell all their friends about. Right. And so we take them out on this sailboat and we go sailing. And it's not about the boat thing. It's just, that's only been something I was able to do in the last few years of my business. I was doing creative events for a while because I just like hosting people. I'm just I'm more selfish. I just like bringing all my couples back to me because I really enjoy being a part of their lives. But I just remember, I'm like, guys, if you invest in your people, they already love you. So if you continue to invest in your past clients rather than just continue to pay, than just paying for ads to people you don't know, they're going to be your source. They're going to tell their friends, continue to invest in the people who are already invested in you. And that's going to change the game of your business. And I think a lot of ways that you can serve your clients that sometimes people think oh my gosh, I could never do that. I'm like, it actually doesn't always cost that much. And it doesn't matter. You don't have to do something like big and grand. I've been in business for 10 years and only been doing it the past 3 or 4. So it's not something that was feasible in the very beginning, but hosting people over for, obviously post-COVID, hosting people for, a wine night or a wine tasting, whatever. It doesn't have to be super expensive, but people are going to remember you. So I think just getting creative, get creative with your business, get creative with how you serve your clients. And like I said, just focus on, if you continue to focus on how I can serve and be community minded, where I'm always thinking of how can I be the ideal photographer for them, then you're going to attract the right people and feel empowered in your story, because your story is yours. And, you know, it's such a personal business. They're going to feel empowered and excited to be a part of your journey.
I love that. I love that. Well, that's the thing too. You hear ideal client, and maybe people do the work on finding that, but it's the next step is, well, what does my ideal client want? How do they talk? What do they need from me? Are they type A? Do they like getting lots of communication? Does my ideal client like being stress free? Which, you know, for most people, hopefully that's, you know, how they figure that out. So that's awesome. And then, we talked about this on the phone, but yeah, I love the marketing and the fun of like including people. Like we talked about at the very beginning, I want everybody to be at the table and having a party or a get together for your couples. Like we, pre-COVID, we bought out a section of seats at our baseball team's stadium and invited all of our couples to come do that.
I love that. That's such a fun idea. I've never heard of someone doing that. I love it.
It was super cool. I mean, a lot of our couples in DC, they're very diehard, DCers, right? They're very into the city, and our baseball team was like moderately okay. They ended up winning the World Series that year, so I'm like, oh yeah, it's
done. Deal. That's amazing.
The kiss of victory, if you will, and it was super cool. And I have this theory that all my couples could be friends. I think that they are very similar. And in the cities are lonely places where it's like hard to build community and get traction. And so that's one of the things I miss pre-COVID. I was like, like now that we've done it first, like what's going to be the next big thing? Can we do something? I usually like mix it with my birthday, usually around the same time. So I'm like, this is this big thing where like we can all be in this together. And so I love that. It's like you have to get past the fear of, well, what about that one couple that didn't have a great experience, or one of those couples who, because you might have one or two couples a year where you're like, oh, I'm not sure. It's hard to tell with them if they're, feeling awesome. But like the majority of your couples are like, hell yeah, I want to come. They want to hang out, and it's like you have to do it for them.
After you do more than one, they do become friends. So a lot of my couples have now befriended each other. So then I have a private Facebook group for my couples. So I give them information. So they're I'm like, hey guys, like let's encourage this one couple. She's looking for a dress shop, and then like all the other brides will like chime in. So there starts this like kind of community. And so then when they see each other meet in person, it's one of those things where the next event they feel, oh, okay, I saw on the invite that so-and-so and so-and-so are going, Yeah. And I really enjoyed talking with them last time. So, and so it kind of builds the community where they're used to seeing the same people every year. And then we add in the year people from that, from the current year, or like the new people. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love that. So cool. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people go to find out more about your story, to talk with you? Maybe somebody's listening and they're going through something similar. Like, where's the best place for them to go find you and pick your brain, talk to you, make Terminator jokes? That's probably just me, but where's the best place for that?
So they can find me at Kelly Lemon on Instagram or kellylemonphotography.com. I'm very accessible. Please DM me. I am happy to help and give advice where I can, and just would love to connect. So don't hesitate to reach out.
I love it. Thanks so much for coming on, Kelly. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, how crazy is that episode, right? Like, she is, an incredible photographer, right? So it's not even like, sometimes, and this might sound mean, sometimes I feel like people that have a gimmick aren't that great. Maybe that's me, right? Whatever my gimmick is, I do not match up to be that great of a photographer. So it's like, oh yeah, he's getting by with the gimmick. Like, that kind of thing. But Kelly is good at everything, and that's terrifying. She's awesome. I feel like that's really, really cool. So guys, definitely go say hi on Instagram. Go check out her work. Check out her inspiration. If you're interested in learning more about photographing and working with people with disabilities, or you just want to be prepared to love on that community, she's going to be the expert I would point you to putting out resources for that. And so she's slowly creating that. You can encourage her to work on it harder. And just go say hi. Ask the dumb questions. She's very open to hearing from you all, and would love to hear from you all. So guys, have a wonderful day. Go check out the wedding guide. If you haven't checked out our Facebook group for exclusive workshops for free, togfb.com. Have a wonderful day, guys. Keep being awesome.